Alright guys, again, hopefully everything's going well today. Today's lesson we're going to start up with circumference and area of a circle. So going back to what we did yesterday, for example. So you had a circle, right? And then with the circle, you had the center. And let's call this P, right? So just in case you guys ever see this, if you ever see that, that's literally just to show you that it's called circle P. But not too worried about that for now. Going over yesterday, we had this that dealt with a radius, right? And quick review, if the radius was 3, we also worked with the fact that this here was the diameter, right? So if the radius is 3, you know that the diameter is going to be 6. Just always remember, diameter is always 2 times bigger than the radius. So if the diameter was 20, you know that the radius is 10. So again, what we went over yesterday. And then also focusing on the fact that whenever you have an angle that's touching the center, it's a central angle, right? And if the central angle is 20 degrees, you know that the arc that corresponds to it's also going to be 20 degrees. If this angle here was 35 degrees, you know that the arc that corresponds to it too is going to end up being 35 degrees. Always congruent, always. And since it's less than 180, you know it's a minor arc. If it was greater than 180, you know it would be a major arc. And if it's exactly 180, which makes a line, you know it's called a semicircle. Again, I'll just review from yesterday's lesson. Today, what we're going to work with is something called circumference and area of a circle. So again, you have a circle where you have the center. And whenever we're talking about a circle, whenever you're talking about circumference, think of circumference almost as if it's perimeter, where the circumference of a circle is literally what's always going around, what's on the outside part. So the outside part of a circle, all of it that goes around, it's called circumference. Right? So you have the circumference, which is what goes around the circle, and then you have what's on the inside of the circle called the area. And again, don't forget, whenever you're dealing with area is always what's on the inside, and circumference is always what's on the outside. But the only thing that you also got to remember is that circumference literally only applies for circles. Whenever you're dealing with perimeter is for any other figure that has sides. But when it's a circle, you don't call it perimeter, you call it circumference. Circumference is what's outside of the circle. And whenever you're dealing with the formulas for circumference and area of a circle, because there are some, they all differ just because literally you're taking in different things into account for a circle. So the first one, let's start with circumference. And circumference is what's outside of the circle. Let's say I'm talking about wanting to find how much circumference is going around a circle. So you would have a formula called circumference. And there are 2 of them, because one of the formulas will deal with diameter, the other formula will deal with radius. So the first one that there is the one that's called pi times diameter. So literally, if you just multiply pi, which is just a ratio that only works for circles. You guys have always heard about pi. Pi literally is always what wraps around a circle when the radius is 1, but don't stress too much about that for now. Literally, if you want to find the circumference of any circle, you would always multiply pi times diameter. And we'll go into that then. There is another formula then too, which is circumference equals 2 pi r. Again, they both give you circumference, it's just that one formula is using the diameter, the other formula is using the radius. And the best way you can think of it this way is one diameter is double the radius, which means that 2 radii make a diameter, just like this. Where if that's a radius, and this would be a radius, right? But altogether it makes 1 diameter. And that's where literally it comes in. 2 radii is the same thing as 1 diameter. So whenever you see that, that's where the 2r comes from. 2 radii is 1 diameter. But again, just showing you where it's coming from. When you actually want to use it, again, it all depends on what they give you. Because sometimes they give you a diameter, sometimes they give you a radius, sometimes they can give you both, and it doesn't matter. It's up to you what you want to use. So for example, let's say that the radius was let's say that the radius is 3 inches, right? And you wanted to find the circumference. Most people now would use this one, just because the 3, since it's from the center to the side, that's a radius. Since it's a radius, use the formula that has to deal with radius, right? So let's say we wanted to use that. We would do C equals 2 pi. And since the radius is 3, you would literally substitute 3 right there, right? And that's just how you would actually go about using it. Now it's how do you find it? And 2 ways you can find it and express it. First thing is, since they're all together and there's no plus sign or minus sign, whenever you have all these terms together, you just multiply them. So the easiest way to actually do this is doing 2 times 3, which is 6, right? And 6 again came from 2 times 3. That 2 times that 3. And the one thing we didn't use is the pi. And since we didn't use pi, we just bring it down. So literally 2 times 3 was 6. We didn't touch the pi, so we brought it down. That's one way that sometimes people can write their answers. They can write it like this. There's another way that sometimes people can write their answer, which is, most of you may know this already at this point, pi represents a number. Pi literally represents that most of you know. Pi would represent typically 3.14, which is what most people normally actually use it for. So instead of writing 6 times pi, a lot of times people would do 6 times 3.14, which if you want to, you could also do, which will give you the right answer. And once you multiply it, it would end up giving you 18.84 inches squared. Inches, I'm sorry. We'll get to that in a sec, what I said about squared. And it's literally that. If you want to, you can write one answer with pi. If you always want to just use the decimal, you're more than welcome to. You would just multiply that out and that's it. So again, let's try another one out, because what I was trying to show you guys is that there are 2 formulas. You can use whichever one you want to actually use. And so for example, let's say that I wanted to use the first one, and a lot of people sometimes will do this because they think that that formula is a lot easier for finding circumference with the diameter. You know that pi is 3.14, right? But let's just get out of it for a sec. If you wanted to use this one too, you could. Because if the radius is 3, you know that the diameter is going to be 6. Just because again, diameter is always 2 times the radius. So now if I know that, you would have pi times 6, which would give us the exact same answer we did before, where you would do 6 times pi, which would give you 18.84 inches. Again, doesn't matter what you want to use. I would always say, if you guys feel more comfortable, use the formula with whatever they give you. If they give you a radius, use the formula that uses radius. If they give you a diameter, use the formula that says diameter. But I leave it up to you. So again, whenever you're thinking about this answer, just think of it this way. If you're talking about circumference, circumference is what's going around a circle, right? So you know that around this circle, you would have 18.84 inches going around. And let's try another one, just so you guys can actually get the hang of it. And some of you already, most of you probably see the answer already, find it easy, which is great. Let's say now that I wanted to give you a circle, right? And I wanted to tell you that the radius is 7 feet, right? You know, the radius is 7 feet. So if you wanted to find the circumference, most people, again, since they give you a radius, they would use the formula 2 pi r, right? And now, all you would do is just substitute. You know that the radius is 7, so you would end up writing 2 times pi times 7. And once you get that, again, you can multiply 2 times 7, which gives you 14, right? Because 2 times 7 is 14. And since I didn't use the pi, bring it down. And again, if you wanted to leave your answer like that, you could. If you wanted to write your answer as 14 pi, you could. It's more than acceptable. It's actually a much preferable way to do it in math. But again, most people usually like to convert it to a decimal, which you could. So if you wanted to, you can write 14. And whenever you see pi, a lot of times people think of the number 3.14. And once you guys multiply that out, 1 second. Sorry about this, just to actually move this along. 14 times 3.14 would give you 43.96 feet. Just that. Okay. And what you know about circumference is, for this circle, you would have 43.96 feet going around. And that's what circumference is how much goes around the outside of a circle. Now, if we go to the other idea, because part of it is circumference, the other idea is area of a circle. And whenever you're talking about area, most of you are all good with this already, where you know that area is always what's inside of a circle. So you got a circle, right? You want to find the area. Now the difference between area and circumference is circumference, you can use one of those two formulas. When it comes to area, there's only one formula for it. So whenever you're trying to find the area of a circle, the one thing that you always need is a radius. Always. If they give you a radius, great. If they give you a diameter, you gotta find the radius. Which again, it's not difficult. And the formula for area of a circle is pi r squared. And not too difficult to use. Actually pretty simple to use when you get used to it. So let's do an example. Let's say that the radius now was 4 centimeters, right? We want to do 4 centimeters. So since it already gives us the radius, and again, the radius is always from the center to the side, just substitute it. We know that the area would end up being pi, and we know that the radius is 4 and squared. So that's all it is, it's just substituting the radius. Now when it comes to simplifying it, you gotta be careful, because sometimes people are gonna multiply those first, but you always gotta remember, first thing that you always have to do before multiplication is exponents. Exponents come before multiplication. So first thing you wanna do is square the 4, right? And be careful, because some people are gonna end up doing 4 times 2, but it's not. Always gotta remember, 4 squared means that it's 4 times 4. So we know that 4 times 4 is 16. Again, 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16. And you gotta bring down the pi. And just like we did for circumference, if you want to, you can leave your answer with pi. But now if we leave it with pi, you gotta remember that it's gonna be centimeters. Now it's gonna end up being squared. Because since we're dealing with area, whenever you're dealing with area, area is always squared. Always. Can't forget the squared for area. And if you wanted to, same thing we did before. If you actually wanted to simplify this, to keep it as a decimal, you could. You would end up doing 16 times 3.14, which would end up giving you, sorry again, 16 times 3.14, which would end up giving you 50.24 centimeters squared. There you go. However you guys want to write it. If you want to write it as pi, you're more than welcome to. If you want to write it in terms of a decimal, you're more than welcome to. It's up to you. Just since we're dealing with area, don't ever forget the square. And again, area is always what's inside of the circle. So if we're looking at those answers, 50.24 is how much space is inside of the circle. And if we were talking about circumference, we'd be talking about how much space is on the outside. Now let's try another one with these, because I do want to show you that there is a difference. Because when it comes to finding the circumference is always easy. When it comes to finding the area, there is a mistake that sometimes people make. Because again, there's only one formula for it. So let's say now that I gave you this. And this is where you got to be careful now, because a lot of times, again, people will just substitute whatever number they get you. Right now, we have that. And let's say that that right there is, let's say it's 20 feet. Just to keep it easy. You know you want to find the area, right? So when you want to find the area of the circle, you want to use a formula for area of a circle, all right, which is pi r squared. And this is where you have to be careful, because a lot of times now what people would do is they would do pi times 20 squared. People would literally write pi times 20 squared. And that's a big mistake, because what you got to remember is you need the radius, right? This isn't the radius because it's going from one side to the other. What they actually give us is the diameter. So in order for you to figure this out, the diameter is always double the radius. So if the diameter is 20, you know that the radius is going to be 10. Always. Radius is always half of the diameter. And just to even see it better, if you know that the whole thing is 20, you know that that would be 10. And you know that this part here would be 10. And that's where I'm getting the 10 from. Literally, you know that the radius is there, radius is there, radius is always half, always. So that's where I got the 10 from. So always be careful with that. Always be careful with that. So now we got that. And all it is, it's just simplifying like we did before. Well, first thing, before you multiply, you would actually do the square. So you would end up doing 10 squared, which means 10 times 10. And 10 times 10 is 100. So you got 100 times pi, right? Because all we did was 10 times 10 was 100. We ended up bringing the pi down. And if you wanted to, again, you could leave it like that. We ended up having 10 feet. So if you wanted to, you can write your answer as 100 feet squared, which would be one way. And again, don't forget to put the square. Every time you're dealing with area, always put the square. And if you wanted to, you can multiply that out too, which would end up being 100 times 3.14. Because every time you see pi, again, most times people always estimate it to 3.14. If you were to multiply those two out, it would end up giving you 314 feet squared. But again, however you guys want to write it. If you want to write it as pi, you could. If you want to write it as a decimal, in this case it's not a decimal, but if you want to multiply the number times pi, you're more than welcome to do so. And don't forget, every time you're dealing with area, it's always squared. So just to review it all this again, because it is a few ideas, and I want to make sure that you guys actually get this. Whenever you're dealing with the circle, you have a circle, sometimes you'll have the radius, sometimes you'll have the diameter. If you're talking about what's going on the outside, it's always circumference, always. And circumference is always either 2 pi r, or circumference is pi d. And again, r stands for radius, d stands for diameter. It's whatever they give you or whatever you want to use. You have the choice. But when it comes to area of a circle, area is on the inside. So if they're asking you for area, you always got to be careful, because now it's not 2 choices. Now it's just 1. And whenever they ask you for the area, you got to make sure that you use the formula pi r squared. And you can't use diameter. It has to be the radius. So again, if they were to actually give you that and say that the whole diameter was 30, you know that the radius would end up being 15. Because it's always half, 15, 15. So just be careful. Always make sure whenever you're actually figuring out area that you're actually using the radius and not the diameter. Always use the radius and not the diameter. Don't ever use the entire section. And hopefully this helped you guys out with circumference and area. Don't forget, area is what's on the inside of a figure, and it's squared always when you write your final answer. And circumference is always what's on the outside. Again, guys, hope you're doing well. Good luck.